Every new year is supposed to feel like a fresh start. People count down the final seconds, make promises to themselves, and believe that when the clock strikes midnight, something changes. That whatever was chasing them in the past year gets left behind. But that isn't always how it works. Sometimes, the moment the year changes, something else begins. The stories you're about to hear didn't happen years ago, or in distant places. They happened right as one year ended and another began. During those quiet moments after the celebrations fade, when the world feels briefly still, a time when most people are distracted, a time when fewer people are watching, a time when it's easier for things to go unnoticed. These are three terrifying, true stories from people who experienced something disturbing at the very start of a new year. Experiences that didn't feel symbolic or coincidental, just wrong. Moments that made them realize the year didn't begin with hope, it began with fear. So as you listen, remember this. The calendar may change, the clock may reset, but some things don't care what year it is. And sometimes, the first night of a new year is the one you never forget. The countdown had just ended. I remember watching the numbers hit 0 on my phone as fireworks went off somewhere in the distance. People outside were cheering, laughing, shouting, "Happy New Year," into the night. For a few seconds, everything felt loud and alive. Then it all stopped. Not immediately, but fast enough that I noticed it. I was alone in my apartment that night. No party, no friends over. Just me, sitting on the couch, scrolling through messages and half watching the muted TV. When the noise outside faded, the silence felt heavier than it should have. I checked the time again. 12:01 a.m. That's when I heard it. A sound from inside the apartment. At first, I thought it came from upstairs. Maybe someone dropping something or furniture being moved. But the noise was too close for that. It sounded like it came from just beyond the living room, somewhere down the short hallway that led to my bedroom. It wasn't loud. It wasn't sudden. It was the sound of something being adjusted, shifted, like someone quietly settling into place. I held my breath and listened. Nothing else followed. I told myself it was just the building reacting to the cold. Old places make noises all the time, especially at night, especially when it's quiet. But then I realized something that made my stomach tighten. Whatever I heard hadn't happened before midnight. It happened right after the year changed, and for some reason that timing felt intentional. I stayed on the couch for a long time after that sound, staring down the hallway like something might step into view if I looked hard enough. Nothing did. The TV continued playing silently, fireworks flashing across the screen from cities I didn't recognize. I turned the volume back on, hoping the noise would make me feel less alone, but it only made everything feel more artificial. I muted it again. The apartment was quiet in a way that felt unnatural, like the kind of silence that settles in after everyone has already left. I checked my phone. Messages were still coming in, Happy New Year texts, missed calls from friends, but I didn't feel like answering any of them. I kept listening. A few minutes passed, then 10. I started to relax, convincing myself I'd imagined the sound. Maybe it was a pipe knocking or the heater turning on. Old buildings do that, especially around midnight when temperatures drop. I stood up and walked slowly toward the hallway, telling myself that if I checked and saw nothing, the feeling would go away. Halfway down the hall, I stopped. The air felt different there. Cooler, still. My bedroom door was open, just the way I'd left it earlier. The light inside was off, the room dark. I stood there, listening for anything out of place. That's when I noticed the smell. It wasn't strong, but it didn't belong. Not food, not smoke. Just something faint and stale, like a room that hadn't been opened in a long time. I flipped on the bedroom light. Everything looked normal. The bed was untouched. The closet door was closed. No windows open. No signs anyone had been there. I laughed quietly at myself, feeling stupid for letting the timing get to me. Of course my brain was making connections. It was New Year's. Expectations were high. Emotions were weird. I turned off the light and started back toward the living room. That's when I heard it again. This time, it wasn't a single sound. It was movement. Soft, careful movement, coming from behind me. From inside the bedroom I had just checked. I froze in place, my heart instantly racing. The sound stopped. I waited, counting seconds in my head. Nothing. I turned around slowly and looked back into the dark room. Something was different. I couldn't tell you exactly what it was at first, just that the room didn't feel empty anymore, like someone had stepped back into the shadows the moment I turned my back. My phone buzzed in my hand, making me flinch. A notification. Happy 2026. I glanced at the time. 12:04 a.m. Only 3 minutes had passed since the year changed, and somehow, it already felt too late. I stood there in the hallway, staring into my bedroom, trying to convince myself that nothing had changed. The room was dark but familiar. Same furniture, same layout, same silence. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone anymore. I took one slow step forward. The floorboard creaked beneath my foot, loud enough to make my heart jump. I froze again, listening for a response. That's when I heard breathing. Not heavy, not panicked, calm. It was coming from inside the bedroom. I held my breath, hoping the sound would stop. It didn't. Instead, it stayed steady, like whoever was making it had no reason to hide anymore. My pulse hammered in my ears as I reached for the light switch on the wall. The moment I flipped it on, the breathing stopped. The room flooded with light, and my eyes scanned every corner. The bed, the closet, the space behind the door. Nothing. No one. I laughed shakily, telling myself I was exhausted, that the silence after midnight was messing with my head. I turned the light off and started to step back into the hallway. Behind me, the mattress creaked. I spun around just in time to see the blankets at the edge of the bed shift slightly, like someone had just stood up after sitting there for a while. The indentation faded slowly, deliberately, as if whatever caused it wanted me to see it leave. I stumbled backward into the hallway, my heart racing, my mind screaming that this wasn't normal. I grabbed my phone, my fingers clumsy as I unlocked it, desperate to call someone, anyone. Before I could dial, I heard it. A voice. Not from my phone, from inside the apartment. Quiet. Close. It didn't shout or whisper. It just said, "It started." My screen lit up with a notification. January 1st, 2026. And in that moment, I knew whatever had just entered my apartment hadn't come by accident. It had been waiting for the year to change. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed on the couch with the lights on, my phone in my hand, listening to every small sound the apartment made. Pipes knocking, the hum of the refrigerator, distant fireworks still echoing somewhere far away. Nothing else happened. By morning, the fear felt duller, less sharp, like something my mind had exaggerated because of the timing. New Year's does strange things to people, I told myself. Expectations, silence, being alone. It was a perfect mix for overthinking. When the sun came up, I went back into my bedroom. Everything looked normal. The bed was flat. The blankets were exactly where I'd left them. No smell, no sound, no sign that anything had been there at all. I almost felt embarrassed for being so shaken. Life went on after that. Weeks passed, then months. The memory of that night faded into something I only thought about occasionally, usually late at night, when the apartment was quiet. But there's one detail I can't ignore. Ever since that night, my phone always glitches at 12:01 a.m. on January 1st. The screen lights up for no reason. No notification, no message, just the time. And every year, without fail, when I notice it, I feel that same stillness in the apartment, like something is listening, waiting to see if I notice that it's still here. I had planned to be alone that night. No parties, no crowds, no noise. I told myself it would be peaceful to welcome the new year quietly, without distractions. Just me, my apartment, and the distant sound of fireworks from other people's celebrations. As midnight approached, I sat by the window, watching flashes of light bloom in the sky. Somewhere far away, people were counting down. I could hear muffled cheers echoing through the streets below. When the clock hit 0, I whispered, "Happy New Year," to no one in particular. Then the noise faded. The fireworks slowed. The shouting stopped. And suddenly the city felt empty. I checked my phone. Messages came in from friends and family, but I didn't answer them right away. I just sat there, listening to the quiet settle in. That's when I realized how still everything was. No cars passing, no voices outside, not even the usual hum of the building. It felt like the world had paused. I stood up and walked into the kitchen to pour myself a drink, trying to shake the strange feeling crawling up my spine. The lights flickered briefly as I passed under them, but I ignored it. Old building, I told myself. As I turned back toward the living room, I noticed something that made my heart skip. The front door was unlocked. I was sure I'd locked it earlier. I always did. I stood there staring at it, listening to the silence stretch longer and longer. And for the first time that night, the thought crossed my mind. Maybe I wasn't as alone as I thought. I stood in the kitchen staring at the front door, my mind replaying the last time I remembered locking it. I was certain I had turned the lock. I always did. It was muscle memory at this point, but the door stood there now, closed but unlocked, like someone had gently tested it and left it that way. I didn't move right away. I listened. The apartment was quiet, too quiet. No footsteps in the hallway outside. No voices from neighboring units. Not even the distant sound of traffic I was used to hearing, even late at night. I slowly walked toward the door, every step feeling louder than it should have. I checked the lock carefully, turning it until I heard the solid click. Then I tried the handle, just to be sure. Locked. That should have been the end of it, but the uneasy feeling didn't go away. I checked my phone again. More New Year messages had come in, but something about answering them felt wrong, like it would break whatever fragile awareness I had. I set the phone face down on the counter and leaned against it, rubbing my hands together to calm myself. That's when I heard a sound from inside the apartment. It came from behind me, a soft shuffle. Not footsteps exactly, more like fabric brushing against something. I turned around slowly, my heart starting to race as I looked toward the hallway that led to the bedroom. The light in the hallway was off. I didn't remember turning it off. I stood there, staring into the darkness, waiting for something to move. Nothing did. The hallway just sat there, empty and still. "You're tired," I muttered to myself. "That's all." I walked back into the living room and sat down on the couch, keeping my eyes on the hallway the entire time. Minutes passed, then more. The longer I sat there, the more convinced I became that I was letting my imagination run wild. Then my phone buzzed. I flinched and grabbed it immediately. It was a notification, not a message, not a call, just the lock screen lighting up. I frowned. My phone wasn't set to do that. I unlocked it and checked the time. 12:09 a.m. I was about to put it back down when I noticed something strange. My step counter had updated. It showed a few extra steps taken, steps I knew I hadn't walked. I stared at the number, my pulse quickening as I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was inaccurate. Maybe it counted movement while I was sitting. But then I heard it again, that same soft shuffle. This time it came from the hallway, and it was closer. I leaned forward on the couch, my breath shallow, my eyes fixed on the darkness. The sound stopped as suddenly as it had started, like whatever made it knew I was listening. That's when the realization finally settled in. I wasn't just alone in the apartment. I was alone with something else. I stayed seated on the couch, barely breathing, listening for that sound to come back. The apartment felt smaller now, tighter, like the walls had shifted inward while I wasn't looking. I kept my eyes locked on the hallway, waiting for movement, for a shadow to step forward. Nothing happened. For a moment, I thought maybe this was the point where fear burned itself out, where my body realized there was no immediate danger and let me relax. That's when the hallway light turned on. I didn't touch the switch. The light flicked on smoothly, filling the hallway with a dull yellow glow. It revealed nothing unusual, just the familiar doors, the same carpet, the same quiet. My heart started pounding. I stood up slowly, my legs stiff as I took a step toward the hallway. Halfway there, I stopped. Something was wrong. The hallway light was on, but the switch was still in the down position. I didn't move closer. I didn't need to, because I heard breathing. It came from somewhere near the bedroom door, slow, controlled, almost thoughtful, not rushed, not panicked, like whoever was there had nowhere else to be. I backed away, my heel bumping into the couch. My phone slipped from my hand and hit the floor with a sharp crack. The breathing stopped instantly. The silence that followed was worse. I bent down slowly and picked up my phone. The screen was still lit. A new notification had appeared. Happy New Year. No name, no number. Just those two words. The hallway light turned off. At the same moment, I heard footsteps. Not running, not approaching, walking away. They moved down the hallway, past the bedroom, and stopped right at the front door. I watched, frozen, as the handle turned. Just slightly. Then it clicked back into place. Whoever it was didn't leave. They unlocked the door and walked back inside. I don't remember sitting back down on the couch, but somehow I did. The front door was locked again. I checked it 3 times, twisting the knob until my hand hurt, needing to hear that solid click over and over. Nothing else moved. No footsteps. No breathing. Just silence. I stayed awake until morning. When the sun finally came up, the apartment looked normal again. Ordinary. Almost harmless. The hallway light worked fine. The lock showed no signs of being tampered with. My phone had no record of the notification I'd seen. No message, no sender, nothing. I told myself it was exhaustion. New Year's messes with your head. Being alone amplifies things. Fear fills in the gaps when there's too much quiet. That explanation worked, for a while. But there's one thing I still can't explain. Every New Year since then, I feel it again. Right after midnight, the apartment goes quiet in the same unnatural way. My phone lights up without a notification, and the hallway feels occupied. I don't hear footsteps anymore. I don't hear breathing. But sometimes, when I check the front door the next morning, it's unlocked. And no matter how many times I tell myself I'm imagining things, I can't shake the feeling that whatever came inside that night didn't need to force its way in. It just needed me to be alone when the year changed. The first night of 2026 didn't feel special. By the time I got home, the fireworks were already over. The streets were quiet again, littered with bits of trash from celebrations that had ended hours earlier. It felt like the world had already moved on. I locked the door behind me and stood there for a moment, listening. Nothing. Just the low hum of the heater and the distant sound of someone's TV through the wall. I remember thinking how normal everything felt, almost disappointing after all the build-up people attach to a new year. I checked the time on my phone before putting it down. 1:17 a.m. I went straight to bed. Sometime later, I woke up without knowing why. My room was dark, quiet, and still. At first, I thought I just had a dream, but the feeling in my chest told me something had pulled me out of sleep. I stayed still, listening. That's when I noticed the silence wasn't complete. There was a faint sound coming from somewhere in the apartment. Not loud enough to identify, just subtle enough to notice once I focused on it. It sounded like movement, slow, careful, like someone trying not to wake anyone up. I checked my phone again. 1:26 a.m. Only 9 minutes had passed, but whatever I was hearing hadn't been there before, and for some reason, deep down, I knew it wasn't passing through. It was settling in. I stayed in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening as carefully as I could. The sound was faint, almost easy to miss if you weren't paying attention. It came and went, never staying long enough for me to fully understand it. Sometimes it sounded like footsteps on carpet, other times more like fabric brushing against a wall. I told myself it was the building. Apartments settle, pipes expand, floors shift. I'd lived there long enough to know the usual noises, and this didn't quite match any of them. Still, I didn't move. There's a moment, late at night, where your body feels heavy and light at the same time. Where fear doesn't make you jump, it pins you down. That's how I felt as I lay there, listening to something move through my apartment like it had all the time in the world. The sound stopped. The sudden quiet made my ears ring. I waited, holding my breath, expecting it to start again. It didn't. After a few minutes, I sat up slowly and reached for my phone. The screen lit up the room just enough for me to see my surroundings. Everything looked normal. The door was closed. The closet was shut. Nothing out of place. I checked the time. 1:33 a.m. I considered getting up and checking the apartment, but the thought of walking through those dark rooms made my stomach tighten. Instead, I stayed where I was, scrolling aimlessly, trying to distract myself. That's when I noticed the smell. It wasn't strong, but it was wrong. Not food, not smoke. Something stale and cold, like air that hadn't moved in a long time. It didn't belong in my bedroom. I lowered the phone and sniffed the air again. The smell was stronger near the door. I stood up slowly, my feet cold against the floor, and opened the bedroom door just a crack. The hallway beyond was dark, but I could tell immediately that the smell was coming from there. I listened. Nothing. No movement. No sound. I opened the door a little wider. That's when I heard it again. Movement. Further down the hall now. It sounded deliberate, careful, like whoever was moving knew exactly where everything was and didn't need to rush. My heart started pounding as I realized something that made the fear settle deeper. Whatever was in my apartment wasn't trying to scare me. It wasn't hiding either. It was acting like it belonged there. I stood in the doorway, my hand resting lightly on the frame, listening. The movement continued somewhere deeper in the apartment. Not rushing, not stumbling. It sounded like someone walking with purpose, confident in the dark, like they didn't need to feel their way around. I stepped into the hallway. The floor creaked softly beneath my weight, louder than I expected. The sound down the hall stopped immediately. I froze. The silence stretched, thick and uncomfortable. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat as I stared into the darkness, waiting for something to happen. That's when I heard breathing. It wasn't close. Not yet. It came from the living room. Slow, steady, patient. Whoever was there wasn't surprised to hear me. If anything, it felt like they were waiting for me to notice. I backed up a step, my heel brushing against the bedroom door. The breathing continued, unchanged, like my fear didn't affect it at all. I raised my phone, the dim light barely cutting through the darkness ahead. The hallway looked empty. No movement, no shape stepping forward, but the breathing was still there. I swallowed hard and took another step forward. The breathing stopped. For a brief second, relief washed over me, until I heard something else. A chair scraping softly across the floor. It was coming from the living room. I hadn't left a chair out. My hands were shaking now as I reached the end of the hallway. The living room was still mostly dark, lit only by faint moonlight through the window. Shapes of furniture sat where they always did, except one. The chair near the table was pulled out, not knocked over, not moved roughly, just pulled back, like someone had been sitting there. My phone buzzed suddenly in my hand, making me flinch. A notification. No sender, no sound, just the screen lighting up. 1:38 a.m. Then, from somewhere just beyond the edge of the room, I heard a quiet voice. It didn't shout, it didn't whisper. It simply said, "It's quiet now." And in that moment, I realized whatever was in my apartment wasn't passing through. It wasn't lost. It had chosen to be there. On the very first night of the year, I didn't respond. I stood there in the hallway, staring into the living room, waiting for something else to happen. Another sound, another movement, another word. Nothing did. The apartment settled back into silence, like it had decided it was done for the night. I slowly backed away, locking myself in the bedroom and turning on the light. I didn't sleep. I sat on the bed until morning, watching the door and listening to every small noise. When the sun finally came up, the apartment looked normal again. The chair was pushed back under the table. The air smelled clean. No signs that anything had been moved. I checked every room. Nothing was out of place. I almost convinced myself it had been a dream, my mind reacting to exhaustion, to the strange feeling of a new year beginning. But that explanation didn't hold, because later that day when I checked my phone, I noticed something strange in my activity log. Between 1:20 a.m. and 1:40 a.m., my step counter recorded movement. I hadn't walked anywhere. I was either in bed or standing still. I still live in that apartment, and nothing like that has happened again. But every year, on January 1st, I wake up sometime between 1 and 2 in the morning. The apartment feels quiet in the same unnatural way. The air feels occupied, and I don't get up anymore. Because whatever was there on the first night of 2026 didn't scare me away. It stayed.